She jumped into a stranger's car to save her son, not knowing he's the billionaire who's been hunting for her for 4 years. The black SUV had been idling across the street for 12 minutes when Imani Vale stopped pretending it was a coincidence. Rain hammered the pharmacy awning above her. Her phone was dead. Her 12-year-old son was shivering beside her. And across that wet Atlanta street, beneath a blinking traffic light and a sky splitting with thunder, the past she had spent 3 years outrunning had finally found her again. So she did the only thing a desperate mother could do. She yanked open the passenger door of a stranger's luxury sedan, shoved her son inside, and climbed in after him. "Please," she said, breathless, terrified. "Just drive." Then the man behind the wheel turned, looked straight at her through the storm-dark interior, and said her name like he had been carrying it for years. "Imani, have you ever had a moment when fear made the choice before your mind could catch up? When you knew if you hesitated 1 second too long, everything you loved could be at risk?" Because what this exhausted mother didn't know was that the stranger she had just trusted with her son's life was no stranger at all. He was the billionaire who had spent 4 years trying to find the woman who once saved his life, and tonight, he was about to reveal a truth that would change everything she thought she understood about betrayal, protection, and the kind of love that arrives quietly after the storm. Hi, my beautiful sisters. Some of you know exactly what it feels like to be tired in your bones and still have no choice but to keep going. To smile for your children, handle the bills, carry the fear, and act like your heart is not bruised from all the years you had to survive what should have never happened to you. This story is for every woman who has ever had to rebuild in silence, for every mother who learned how to stand guard while healing, and for every soul who forgot, just for a little while, that being strong does not mean you were meant to do everything alone. Tonight's story is about more than danger. It is about dignity. It is about sisterhood. It is about the kind of help that does not control you, and the kind of love that does not ask you to shrink to receive it. So if that speaks to your spirit, leave a comment saying "still standing" and settle in. This one is going to hold your heart. The sedan slipped away from the curb just as the traffic light changed. Tires hissed over rain-soaked asphalt. For 3 full seconds, Imani could hear nothing except her own breathing and the violent beat of blood in her ears. Beside her, Zion twisted around in his seat, staring out the back window. "Mama," he whispered. "It's still there." She didn't look. She couldn't. If she turned and saw that black SUV still following, something inside her would snap clean in two. The man driving kept his hands steady on the wheel. He was older than when she had last seen him, though that was true of both of them. His hair, once dark with only the faintest silver at the temples, was now brushed with more gray than black. His jaw was sharper. His face carried the kind of lines only grief or responsibility could carve. But the eyes were the same, deep-set, discerning, too intelligent for comfort. Warren St. James. Even now, even terrified, the name landed with force. Zion looked between them, brows knit tight. "You know him?" Imani swallowed. "A long time ago." Warren glanced in the mirror, then took a right turn so smoothly it looked effortless. "I know your mother," he said quietly. "Or at least I knew her once." "That's not what you just said," Zion replied. For one startled second, Warren's mouth almost curved. "No," he admitted. "It's not." Imani finally forced herself to look behind them. The SUV had reached the intersection but stayed put as the light changed again. Then, as if tonight's terror had only been a casual errand, it rolled straight through and disappeared into the rain. Her shoulders dropped an inch. Not safety. Not yet. But a breath. She sat back against the seat, damp coat clinging to her, pulse still racing. Warren's car smelled faintly of cedar, leather, and something cleaner beneath it, like pressed cotton and old books. Not the synthetic sharpness of expensive cologne. A real scent. A lived-in scent. It unsettled her more than if the interior had smelled like cold wealth and arrogance. He looked like the magazines now, maybe more imposing in person than the glossy covers ever managed. Atlanta Business Chronicle, Forbes South, Savannah Gala coverage, Warren St. James, real estate titan, philanthropic investor, widower, power broker. The kind of man whose name got spoken in rooms she had only entered to refill water or collect paperwork. For years ago, when she met him, he had been none of those things to her. He had just been a man in a hospital bed trying not to die angry. "Mama," Zion said softly, tugging her sleeve. "Who is he?" Amani opened her mouth, then closed it again. Warren answered for her. "My name is Warren. Just Warren." Another near smile. "For now." "Zion," the boy said, lifting his chin the way he did when he was trying to be brave. "I'm Zion. I know." The words dropped into the car like a stone into still water. Amani turned sharply. "What does that mean?" Warren kept his eyes on the road. "It means I know your son's name." "How?" "I'll explain when you're warm and he's fed." The old instinct returned at once, sharp as a blade. Control the room. Control the unknown. Never let a powerful man set the pace. "No," she said. "You can explain now." Thunder rolled over the skyline. The city beyond the windshield flashed and vanished in silver sheets. Warren's voice stayed even. "Your ex-husband uses intimidation like other men use punctuation. If that vehicle was his, this conversation deserves walls, not traffic." The precision of that sentence chilled her. Zion's eyes widened. "He knows about Dad?" Amani shut her eyes for half a heartbeat. There it was. The word that still carried too much weight for a man who had earned too little of it. "My ex," she corrected gently. Zion looked down at his lap and nodded once. The hurt in that tiny movement nearly undid her. Warren's hands tightened, just slightly, on the steering wheel. "Seat warmers are on," he said after a moment. "Second button on the door." The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. She was sitting inside a stranger not stranger's luxury sedan in the middle of a storm, running from a man who refused to let her life become fully hers. And this billionaire was reminding her about seat warmers like he'd picked her up from the grocery store. She pressed the button. Heat rose slowly beneath her. It felt dangerous how quickly comfort could make fear feel lonelier. "Where are we going?" she asked again. "My house." "No." He nodded once, as if he had expected the answer. "Yes. I'm serious. So am I." "I am not taking my child into your home because of one frightening night and a conversation we have not had in 4 years." "That is your right," he said calmly. "But you got into my car because something in you recognized that I was safer than whatever was waiting outside your building." She turned fully toward him. "You don't get to read my instincts back to me." "No," he said, "but I do get to say this. If the man watching you tonight is who I think it is, then letting you and Zion out anywhere public would be irresponsible." "You think you know my life?" "No," Warren said. "I know enough to be worried." Zion, who had spent years listening when adults thought he wasn't, spoke into the tense silence. "Mom, maybe we should just hear him out." She looked at him. Rainwater clung to his lashes. His hoodie was soaked at the shoulders. He was trying to be calm for her again, trying to make himself smaller, easier, less like a burden in a moment that should never have belonged to him. That decided it. Not the billionaire beside her. Not the car. Not the mystery. Her son's tired face. "Fine," she said quietly. "For 1 hour." Warren nodded. "For as long as you need." The city thinned as they turned north. Midtown glass gave way to quieter roads, old trees, stone walls, discreet gates. Buckhead at night had a way of looking less like a neighborhood and more like a well-funded secret. The gates opened before they reached them. Zion sat forward. "Whoa!" Amani almost told him not to say things like that, then stopped herself. Let him be 12 for one breath. The house was large without being vulgar. Long, low, lit from within by warm amber light instead of gleaming white. Not a monument, a refuge. Rain coursed off the slate roof. Magnolias shivered in the wind. Somewhere beyond the hedges, the city still roared, but here it felt very far away. Warren pulled beneath a covered drive and came around to open their doors before she could protest. Old manners, she thought, or maybe guilt. Inside, the warmth hit first, then the smell. Chicken stock, rosemary, polished wood, and something sweet baking somewhere deeper in the house. A lamp glowed low in the entry hall beside a table stacked with books and incoming mail. Not staged, not sterile, lived in. A woman in her 60s emerged from the side corridor in a cranberry cardigan and sensible loafers. Her silver curls were pinned up loosely, and her eyes moved over Imani in one swift, exacting sweep that seemed to take in wet sleeves, trembling fingers, exhausted posture, and maternal panic all at once. "Mercy," she said. "Those two are soaked through." "This is Odessa," Warren said. "Odessa, this is—" "Imani," the woman said gently, as if the name had lived in the house longer than its owner wanted to admit. Then she turned to Zion. "And you must be freezing, baby. Come on. Kitchen first. Explanations later. Good soup waits for no child." Zion blinked at her, then at his mother. Imani hesitated. Odessa did not crowd her. She simply held out a thick white towel to Zion and said, "I have nephews. I know that look. I am not kidnapping you. I am feeding you." The boy huffed out a laugh despite himself. And just like that, some tiny knot inside Imani loosened. "Go ahead," she told him. "Stay where I can hear you." "I'll keep him in the kitchen," Odessa said, already turning. "And if you two grown people plan to speak in riddles, at least do it somewhere with chairs." When they were alone in the library, Warren closed the door halfway, not all the way. Another small thing. Another careful choice. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Framed black and white photographs sat between shelves. A woman at a piano, two children on a sailboat, an older couple laughing over a backyard grill. A brass reading lamp cast a low pool of light over a leather chair and a folded newspaper. On the far side of the room, rain streamed down tall windows overlooking a dark garden. Imani remained standing. Warren removed his coat, draped it over a chair, and turned to face her fully. For a moment neither spoke. Then he said, "You disappeared." She let out one short, incredulous breath. "That's an interesting opening. It's an honest one." "Honest." Her voice sharpened. "You were discharged from a private cardiac floor back into a world of assistants, lawyers, and drivers. I was a contract employee working night shifts with a dying marriage and a child at home. You did not exactly lose yourself in the wilderness." His gaze did not flinch. "I looked for you." The room went still. Outside, thunder cracked again. Farther away now. Imani folded her arms. "Why?" His answer came too fast to be rehearsed. "Because you were the first person in years to speak to me like my soul mattered more than my portfolio." That should not have touched her. It did anyway. She looked away, toward the rain on the glass. "That was 4 years ago." "Yes. And now you somehow know my son's name, my ex-husband's habits, and enough about my life to say I'm not safe." "Yes." The word landed hard. Imani turned back slowly. "Then maybe you'd better start talking." From the kitchen came the faint sound of Odessa asking Zion whether tomato soup counted as medicine if made properly, and Zion answering, with complete seriousness, that depended on the quality of the grilled cheese. The ordinary sweetness of it cut through the tension like light through a crack. Warren heard it too. Something in his face softened, then closed again. "I will explain everything," he said. "But if I start where this began, you're going to want to walk out. And I would prefer you understand before you decide whether I deserve that. Try me." He crossed to the desk by the window and opened the top drawer. From inside, he withdrew a cream envelope, slightly worn at the edges, and set it on the desk between them. Her name was written across the front. "Not recently. Years ago." Imani stared at it, a strange pressure building beneath her ribs. "What is that?" "A letter I wrote after I found you," he said. She looked up sharply. "You found me?" His voice dropped lower. "Yes." "When?" "A long time before tonight." Every instinct in her body went taut. He placed one hand flat on the desk, not moving closer. "Before you say anything, there's more." He reached back into the drawer and drew out a photograph. He didn't hand it to her at once. He looked at it first as if even now it offended him. Then he turned it around, and the air left her body. It was Zion, 2 years younger, backpack on one shoulder, walking out of his middle school, and 20 feet behind him, half turned away but unmistakable even in profile, stood Darnell Mercer. Imani's fingers went numb. "No," she whispered. Warren set the photograph down gently. "Yes." She stared at it, unable to blink. The room, the house, the rain, the warmth, all of it seemed to tilt. "What is this?" she asked, but her voice no longer sounded like hers. Warren's answer came quiet, controlled, terrible in its restraint. "It's the reason I never stopped looking over your shoulder. If the story is already touching something deep in your heart, hit that like button right now. Because what Warren reveals next will show Imani that the years she thought she had been surviving alone were not what they seemed at all." Warren did not sit down. Neither did Imani. The photograph remained on the desk between them like a living thing, sharp-edged, impossible, cruel in its silence. Zion in his navy hoodie, one shoelace untied, sunlight on the school sidewalk, and behind him, Darnell Mercer, head slightly lowered as if he already knew how not to be noticed. Imani picked it up with trembling fingers. "That was 2 years ago," she said, barely above a whisper. "Yes. You had someone taking pictures of my son?" "No," his answer came immediately. "I had someone watching your ex after I learned he had begun filing private inquiries under false names." She looked up, anger flaring now because anger was easier than fear. "And somehow that sounds better to you?" "It sounds honest," Warren said quietly. "And honesty is the only thing I can offer you tonight." From the kitchen came Zion's laugh, brief, surprised, real. The sound made her chest tighten harder than the photograph had. Because laughter should never have to exist this close to danger. "What inquiries?" she asked. Warren exhaled slowly, then moved to the far side of the desk, keeping distance between them like he understood she needed room to decide whether this was protection or another kind of intrusion. "After I left the hospital, I asked around for you. Very little at first. Your first name, a son named Zion. Night shifts. No permanent forwarding records because the hospital had changed agencies. Then I stopped looking for a while because I convinced myself it was inappropriate." He paused, eyes flicking once to the photograph. "Then my legal office flagged a name I recognized. Darnell Mercer." "Yes." The way Warren said it, flat, without drama, told her he had said it before in rooms where consequences were arranged quietly. He filed a nuisance complaint against a tenant association in southwest Atlanta. Warren continued. "Your name appeared in a witness attachment because you had signed a statement." Memory flashed immediately. Mold in the vents, broken locks, women in the building tired of being ignored. Her standing in a cramped community room signing papers while Darnell laughed in the hallway and called her stubborn. "I remember that," she said. "I remembered Mercer because he visited my hospital room once." Imani looked up sharply. The memory returned a second later. 4th floor cardiac wing. Late evening. Darnell in one of his expensive charcoal suits, pretending concern because a board member from his church knew someone on the hospital board. He had come to pressure her about answering his calls. Warren had been half awake in bed while she tried to get Darnell out before visiting hours ended. "He threatened the nurse station," Warren said. "He said he was worried about my emotional stability." "He said," Warren corrected, "that women who confuse kindness for independence usually collapse when no one is there to rescue them." A bitter laugh escaped her. "That sounds like him." It sounded like ownership. The word landed like a stone. Ownership. That was exactly what marriage to Darnell had become by the end. Not partnership, not love, not even argument. Just a slow insistence that every room belonged to his version of reality and every person inside it should adapt. Warren opened the envelope and withdrew folded papers. "These are copies," he said. "I kept the originals elsewhere." He handed them across the desk. Legal filings, dismissed petitions, requests for school records. One inquiry filed under a false spelling of Zion's middle name. Imani read the dates and felt something cold move through her body. "He tried twice for school access?" she whispered. "Twice officially," Warren said. "Possibly more." Her fingers tightened so hard the paper bent. I never got notice. No, Warren said, because both filings disappeared before service. She looked up slowly. Disappeared. He held her gaze. I made calls. The room went silent again. Not dramatic silence. The dangerous kind where truth rearranged old years in real time. You interfered in family court? I prevented a man with documented intimidation behavior from obtaining quiet access to a child whose mother had no idea he was trying. You don't get to decide that for me. I know. Then why did you? His answer came with no self-defense. Because when I found out, it was already happening. And because I knew if I came to you then, you would refuse help before hearing the danger. That stung because it was true. It also angered her because it was true. You should have trusted me enough to tell me. I did not yet know whether telling you would make your life safer or simply make you run again. Before she could answer, Odessa knocked lightly on the half-open door with the authority of someone who had long ago decided billionaires could wait. Soup is working miracles, she announced, stepping inside with a tray holding tea for Imani and black coffee for Warren. And before either of you say thank you, save it. You both look like people who have forgotten that warm liquids improve judgment. Imani took the tea automatically. Odessa's eyes flicked to the photograph, then to Warren. So you showed her? Yes. Well, Odessa nodded once. About time. Imani looked at her sharply. You knew. Odessa gave a short, unimpressed breath. Child. I knew before he admitted he was paying investigators to watch a man instead of sleeping like normal grieving people. Warren almost closed his eyes. Odessa. What? She said. You hired retired federal people and then paced this house at 3 in the morning every time new information came in. You think nobody noticed? Imani stared between them. There it was again, that feeling that her private life had somehow been orbiting larger forces she had never seen. Odessa softened her voice. He didn't approach you because I told him not to. The sentence stunned even Warren, if his face meant anything. You told him not to? Imani repeated. Yes. Odessa folded her hands in front of her apron. Because women leaving controlling men do not need powerful strangers appearing with files and explanations before they can breathe. I told him if he cared about your peace, he would help quietly or not at all. Imani looked at Warren. He did not deny it. I listened, he said simply. Odessa nodded. For once. That almost made Imani smile, though tears burned unexpectedly behind her eyes. How long have you worked here? She asked Odessa. Since his wife was alive and his children still visited without appointments. The answer carried history without spectacle. Odessa turned toward the hall. Your boy is eating like someone who finally stopped pretending he wasn't hungry. That's good. Means he trusts the kitchen. Then softer to Imani. Whatever you decide tonight, decide after rest. Fear lies to women when they're exhausted. She left before either of them answered. The library felt different after that. Less like a confrontation, more like standing in the middle of a room where too many truths had arrived at once. Imani wrapped both hands around the tea mug, though she had not tasted it. Your children, she said after a long pause. Do they know about any of this? No. Why not? Because they already think sentiment makes me irrational. The answer came dry, but there was old hurt underneath. She remembered hospital nights now more clearly than she wanted to. The first night he had recognized her face from previous shifts. The second night he had asked why she wore silver hoop earrings under fluorescent hospital light. The third night he admitted his daughter had sent flowers with no card and his son had called his assistant instead of him. The fourth night he had laughed for the first time when she told him expensive misery still looked like misery. And the fifth, when she found him awake at 2 in the morning staring at rain against the hospital glass. You built too much of your life around being needed, she had told him then. He had asked, and what did you build yours around? Endurance, she said. He had looked at her a long time before answering. That sounds lonely. Back then, she had shrugged because loneliness still felt less frightening than honesty. Now, in his library, for years later, that old conversation returned with uncomfortable force. I should have called, she said quietly before she could stop herself. His gaze lifted. When you left the note, she added almost defensively. Maybe not right away, but later. I wrote 3 letters before that one. The confession startled her. 3. The first sounded like gratitude. The second sounded like loneliness. The third sounded too much like a man trying to explain why one honest voice mattered more than it should. And the fourth. He looked toward the envelope on the desk. The fourth was after I found out Mercer was still circling your life. The rain had softened now, tapping rather than striking. From upstairs came a floorboard creak. Zion moving, maybe exploring, maybe just checking where he was. Amani inhaled slowly. So tell me everything, she said. No careful version. Everything. Warren nodded once. I found you 18 months after the hospital, he began. By then you had changed apartments twice, moved Zion to another school district, and taken freelance work under your maiden name. Smart decisions. I wasn't hiding from you. I know. You were hiding from a pattern. He leaned one hand against the desk. The first real report came from an investigator who thought Mercer's interest had faded. Then he sent that photograph. He tapped the picture lightly. After that, I widened the watch. You keep saying watch like I was a project. No, Warren said quietly. You were unfinished concern. That phrase landed deeper than she expected. He continued. Then Odessa found out. From the hallway, as if summoned by her own legend, Odessa called. He means I found invoices. A reluctant laugh slipped out of Amani before she could stop it. Warren's mouth almost softened again. Yes, she found invoices. And then, Amani asked, and then my sister learned. You have a sister? In Decatur. Family law. Dangerous woman when bored. That earned an actual small smile from her. She reviewed the filings Mercer attempted, Warren said. Said the language suggested intimidation through bureaucracy. Not uncommon. Especially when men believe paper can frighten women better than shouting. Amani knew exactly how true that was. Certified letters. Court-looking envelopes. Threats phrased like concern. What did she do? She called someone she trusted. Who called someone else? Odessa's voice floated from the kitchen. And eventually, Warren said, a church deacon named Miss Lorraine knew your downstairs neighbor. Amani blinked. Miss Lorraine from New Birth? Yes. Her mouth opened. No. Yes. Now the shape became visible. Miss Lorraine suddenly insisting she review a legal letter before Amani signed anything. Mrs. Talbot downstairs somehow always hearing the wrong footsteps in the hallway at the right time. An older woman from church, coincidentally, recommending a scholarship program Zion later entered. All these little pieces she had called luck because naming them anything else required believing someone had noticed her struggle more than she had allowed. A quiet network. Women. Of course it was women. Odessa reappeared in the doorway, arms folded. Men imagine they save things because they sign checks, she said. Women save things because we answer phones and remember names. Amani laughed again, but this time tears came with it. Real tears. Exhausted ones. Not because she felt rescued. Because for the first time in years she understood she had not been invisible. That almost hurt more than the fear. If this moment touches your heart, tell me below. Have you ever discovered that someone had been holding you up quietly when you thought you were carrying everything alone? Sometimes the strongest love in our lives never arrives loudly. Sometimes it arrives organized, practical, and wearing sensible shoes. Warren waited until her breathing steadied. Then he asked, very gently, did he hurt you recently? The question changed the room again. Not because of what it implied. Because of how carefully he asked it. Imani stared into the tea she still had not touched. No, she said after a moment. Not recently. The truth needed more shape than that. He learned a long time ago that bruises create paperwork, she said quietly. So he preferred absence used like punishment. Financial pressure. Showing up where Zion could see him. Calling from blocked numbers and saying nothing. Warren's jaw hardened visibly. He came to the building last month, she added. Didn't come upstairs. Just stood in the lobby pretending he was asking about parking permits. And tonight, my neighbor texted that he was asking whether I still worked late Thursdays. That landed hard. Warren said nothing for several seconds. Then, "You're not going home tonight." It was not a command. It was certainty. And for the first time, instead of rejecting it immediately, she found herself too tired to argue. Upstairs, Zion's footsteps moved again. Lighter now. Safe footsteps. Safe at least for tonight. Imani finally lifted the tea and drank. Still warm. Still steady. And for one fragile moment, in a house she never expected to enter, surrounded by truths she had never asked for, she felt the first unfamiliar edge of something dangerous and almost forgotten. Relief. By morning, relief had turned into paperwork. And for the first time in years, Imani understood that peace still demanded witnesses. The first real confrontation happened 3 days later. Atlanta woke under bright winter sun. The kind that made glass towers look harmless even when everyone inside them was negotiating something sharp. Imani stood outside the family court annex downtown with a navy coat buttoned to her throat and her hands wrapped around a paper cup she had not touched. Across the plaza, women moved in quiet clusters. Lawyers in heels, mothers carrying folders, older church women who somehow always looked as if they had arrived prepared for whatever truth the day intended to expose. Beside her, Eleanor St. James adjusted her gloves and scanned the courthouse doors like someone already calculating how many lies would appear before lunch. "You slept?" Eleanor asked. "Enough." "That means no," Eleanor replied. Imani almost smiled. Eleanor was nothing like Warren physically, but the same discipline lived in her face, the same refusal to waste language when precision worked better. Inside the building, Warren had insisted on waiting 2 floors down rather than entering the hearing room. Not because he lacked influence. Because, as Eleanor said earlier that morning, this has to remain her voice first, not his shadow. That mattered more than Imani had expected. For years, men with resources had treated space like ownership. Warren kept stepping back exactly where she needed room. The courtroom doors opened. Darnell Mercer arrived 5 minutes late. Expensive coat, expensive shoes, expensive confidence arranged like armor. And still, the first crack showed when he saw not only Imani, but Eleanor beside her, Miss Lorraine seated on the bench behind them in plum church silk, Mrs. Talbot somehow present with reading glasses low on her nose, and Aunt Celeste, who had announced at dawn, "No woman in this family attends fear by herself." Darnell stopped. That single pause fed every woman in the hallway more satisfaction than anyone admitted aloud. "Well," Aunt Celeste murmured. "Look how surprise humbles posture." Imani did not turn. Darnell approached with the old polished smile he once wore whenever witnesses were near. "You brought an audience." Imani answered calmly. "No, I stopped coming alone." That landed. His smile shifted. "I only wanted a conversation." "No," Eleanor said before Imani needed to answer. "You wanted undocumented access. We brought records instead." For the first time, Darnell looked fully at Eleanor. "And you are the reason your attorney advised a different tone this morning." That ended the conversation before it began. Inside, the hearing itself lasted less than 40 minutes. Because patterns, once written plainly enough, embarrassed men who depended on ambiguity. The judge reviewed call logs, dismissed filings, unauthorized school inquiries, building surveillance reports, and finally the message Warren had received. The photograph of her apartment entrance. The caption beneath it, "You always did like hiding behind other people's doors." The judge removed his glasses, looked directly at Darnell, and asked one devastating question. "Do you understand how often women are expected to call this coincidence until paperwork proves otherwise?" Even Darnell had no polished answer for that. By noon, the order expanded. No contact, no proximity to school, no indirect messaging, no third-party intimidation, clear language, clear consequences. Outside the courthouse, the winter air hit different. Not triumphant, not cinematic, just lighter, as though something old had finally lost oxygen. Miss Lorraine hugged Imani first. Mrs. Talbot announced, "I dressed for exactly this level of satisfaction." Aunt Celeste adjusted her scarf and said, "Now eat something before victory turns into dizziness." Only then did Warren emerge from the far side of the corridor, coat buttoned, expression unreadable until his eyes found hers. He did not ask how it went. He read her face and understood. "It held?" he asked quietly. She nodded. His exhale was small, but she heard it. That mattered more than celebration would have. Because relief looked strange on powerful men, less dramatic, more human. Zion insisted on hearing everything that evening. He sat at Odessa's kitchen island doing homework while pretending fractions deserved his full attention. "So he can't come near school now?" "No." "Or text weird stuff?" "No." "Or stand outside buildings acting like parking is suddenly fascinating?" That made Odessa laugh so hard she nearly dropped a spoon. "No," Imani said, smiling despite herself. "Not that either." Zion nodded slowly. Then, without looking up, he asked the question children saved until adults relaxed. "Does that mean we stop being scared now?" The kitchen quieted. Even Odessa stopped moving. Imani crossed to him and touched his shoulder gently. "It means fear doesn't get to make decisions anymore." He considered that seriously, then asked, "Same thing?" "No," Warren said from the doorway, arriving just in time to answer. "Not the same thing." Zion looked up. Warren continued carefully. "Fear still visits. It just stops running the house." That answer stayed in the room because it belonged there. Children understood truth when adults stopped dressing it up. That evening, Odessa announced dinner would happen in the formal dining room because, in her words, too many life-changing conversations have already happened besides soup. The formal dining room turned out to be less intimidating than expected. Long walnut table, candles, old silver, no unnecessary grandeur. A meal appeared that Odessa pretended required no effort and everyone knew had taken all afternoon. Roasted chicken, sweet potatoes, greens with smoked seasoning that made Aunt Celeste immediately suspicious of hidden culinary alliances. Miss Lorraine had gone home, but Aunt Celeste stayed because a woman does not abandon emotional transitions before dessert. Halfway through dinner, Zion looked at Warren across the table. "Can I ask something weird?" Warren folded his napkin once. "You seem committed to that possibility, so yes. Why didn't you tell Mom sooner?" The room held still. No one interrupted. Warren answered only after thinking long enough to respect the question. Because she had spent years being cornered by men who arrived with too much certainty. Zion frowned. "So you thought waiting fixed that?" "No," Warren said. "I thought arriving carefully mattered more than arriving fast." Aunt Celeste gave one approving nod that did not go unnoticed. Imani looked down at her plate for a second because something in her chest had shifted again. Not dramatically, quietly, the kind of shift older women recognized because it did not feel like falling. It felt like trust deciding whether it might someday loosen its shoulders. 3 nights later came the dinner Warren had asked for. A real one. No legal folders. No crisis. No emergency shelter. He chose a small restaurant off Highland Avenue where nobody cared who owned towers downtown because the owner's grandmother still supervised desserts personally. Imani arrived wearing dark green and restraint. Warren stood when she entered, not performatively, simply because manners still lived where ego had once dominated. "You came," he said. "You sounded surprised. I've learned not to predict brave women." The restaurant glowed low and warm around them. No cameras. No social spectacle. Just ordinary silverware and quiet music and the rare discomfort of 2 adults who already knew too much and yet were beginning something entirely new. For the first 20 minutes they spoke about safe things. Zion's science grades. Odessa's opinion that billionaires should never plate their own food badly. Eleanor's terrifying efficiency. Then the harder truth arrived naturally. "Did you love your wife well?" Imani asked. It was not accusatory. Just adult. Necessary. Warren did not flinch. Not always in the way she deserved. That honesty opened the table wider. I loved responsibility loudly, he added. Affection more quietly than I should have. Amani looked down at her glass. I know that kind of marriage. Yes, he said softly. I suspect you do. And now I know love that asks women to disappear so men can remain comfortable is not love. It is appetite disguised as entitlement. The sentence landed with force, because he understood it now without her teaching it again. That mattered. She studied him carefully. 4 years ago you needed saving, she said. And tonight, he gave the faintest smile. Tonight I know saving and companionship are not the same thing. Outside, Atlanta traffic moved past in blurred red lines. Inside, the table held something far more fragile than romance. Permission. Not for fantasy. For possibility. When dessert came, the owner herself sent pecan pie and whispered to Amani. He tips like an apologetic southern uncle. Keep him humble. That made her laugh harder than she expected. And laughter changed everything because laughter made the evening real. Not symbolic. Not cinematic. Human. Later, outside under cold streetlight, Warren walked her to her car but stopped before reaching for the door. Still careful. Still asking space before occupying it. I meant what I said on the terrace, he told her. About shared weight? Yes. She looked at him for a long second, then asked, Do you know what scares women like me most? He waited. Not pain. We know pain. Her voice stayed quiet. It's peace. Because peace asks whether we remember who we are when struggle stops defining us. That reached him visibly, and his answer came just as quietly. Then take your time remembering. No pressure. No grand gesture. No theft of pace. That was exactly why, when she leaned forward and kissed him, it felt earned rather than sudden. A brief kiss. Warm. Measured. Mature. The kind older love understood instinctively because it did not need spectacle to mean something. When she stepped back, he did not chase the moment. He simply looked at her the way men do when they finally understand gratitude and desire can exist in the same breath without demanding possession. At Christmas, Odessa and Aunt Celeste somehow collaborated on dinner despite claiming they mistrusted each other's seasoning philosophy. Miss Lorraine brought pound cake. Mrs. Talbot brought deviled eggs and legal updates nobody requested. Eleanor brought documents because apparently emotional safety still required folders. Zion used the telescope after dessert and called everyone outside to see Jupiter. And standing beneath magnolia branches strung with soft white lights, Amani watched Warren explain constellations to her son with patient seriousness, as though no conversation in the world mattered more than naming stars correctly for a 12-year-old who finally sounded unguarded. Aunt Celeste stepped beside her, wrapping her shawl tighter. That man loves careful, she said. Amani smiled faintly. You said that before. Because women forget it too easily. Inside, laughter spilled through the open doors. Older women arguing about recipes. Odessa correcting Warren from across the room. Zion laughing so openly it no longer startled anyone. And in that moment the lesson arrived fully. Not dramatic, not sudden, just true. A woman's strength was never proven by how long she endured loneliness. It was proven by what she rebuilt once fear stopped writing the rules. By who she allowed near her peace. By whether love arrived asking for control, or offering respect. And maybe that was why this ending mattered. Not because a billionaire found her, but because when he did, he understood she was never waiting to be rescued. She was waiting for life to bring something that knew how to stand beside her without asking her to become smaller. Outside, Jupiter held steady above Atlanta. Inside, the women called everyone back for pie. And this time, when Amani stepped through the doorway, she did not enter like someone bracing for loss. She entered like someone who had survived enough to recognize peace when it finally spoke her name. Sparkle's yellow heart. Spring came softly to Atlanta that year, not with fanfare, not with sudden transformation, but with dogwoods blooming outside Odessa's kitchen window and mornings that smelled faintly of rain before the sun fully settled over the city. By then, routine had done what romance alone never could. It had made trust ordinary. Warren no longer arrived like an event. He arrived carrying groceries Odessa criticized before he finished setting them down. Legal envelopes Eleanor dropped off without warning, and books Zion pretended not to enjoy until the hallway light under his bedroom door stayed on long after midnight. And Imani, without noticing exactly when it happened, had stopped measuring every peaceful day against the fear that once lived underneath it. That surprised her most. Not that Warren remained steady. He had always been steady once he decided to be. What surprised her was how naturally her body stopped preparing for interruption. She slept fully now. She no longer checked building windows twice before bed. She no longer paused when unknown numbers appeared. And on certain evenings, standing in Warren's kitchen while Odessa corrected both of them at once, she caught herself feeling something so unfamiliar it almost embarrassed her. One Thursday evening, Zion sat at the kitchen island with a pencil tucked behind one ear, pretending to finish math while very clearly listening to adult conversation. Warren leaned over the counter reviewing something on his tablet. Odessa stirred collard greens with the authority of someone who distrusted anyone under 60 seasoning too early. "You are both cutting those carrots wrong," she announced without turning. "I'm not cutting carrots," Warren said. "That is why your generation worries me." Imani laughed softly and reached for the knife herself. Zion looked up. "Are you here tomorrow?" He asked Warren the question casually, but not casually enough to hide what sat underneath it. Warren looked over. "Yes." "Why?" "Career day." "You want me there?" That made Zion immediately defensive. "I didn't say want. I asked if you were free." Imani smiled before Zion noticed. Warren understood the boy too well now to embarrass him. "I am free," he said calmly. "What am I supposed to discuss?" "Poor teenage financial choices from 1982. "Real estate," Zion said. "But make it less boring." Odessa laughed so hard she leaned on the stove. That was how most evenings had begun to feel, unremarkable in ways that mattered deeply. No declarations, no performance, just life learning how to stop bracing. A week later, Aunt Celeste called and announced herself before anyone spoke. "I need proper clothes by Saturday." Imani tucked the phone between shoulder and ear while sorting laundry. "For what?" "For whatever Warren St. James thinks he is hiding with that suspiciously polite tone he used when he asked whether I preferred roses or lilies." Imani froze. On the other end, Aunt Celeste gave a satisfied hum. "Exactly. Thought so." By Saturday afternoon, Odessa behaved strangely calm. Too calm, which meant she knew something and intended to enjoy saying nothing. The house had been quieter than usual all day. No visitors. No Eleanor. No Miss Lorraine. Even Zion had been unusually cooperative, which was suspicious enough on its own. At sunset, Warren asked if she would walk outside with him. Nothing in his tone betrayed intention, but she knew him well enough now to hear care sharpen slightly when something mattered. The back terrace looked almost unchanged from the first evening she had truly exhaled there months earlier. Magnolia leaves moved gently in warm evening air. The city beyond the trees glowed gold and distant. This place had witnessed fear, truth, silence, and now something gentler. Warren stood beside the stone railing for a moment before speaking. No dramatic setup. No rehearsed elegance. That alone told her he had thought carefully. "I have spent most of my life understanding contracts," he said quietly. She folded her arms, watching him. "That sounds dangerous already." His mouth softened faintly. "Probably." He looked toward the garden once, then back at her. "Contracts protect assets, define expectations, limit uncertainty. And this sounds less romantic by the second. That is why I am not giving you a contract." Now she smiled. He stepped closer, but still left that familiar respectful space between them. "The only promise I care about now is one I cannot draft." His voice lowered slightly. "I know what your life cost you before peace returned. I know trust arrived slowly because it had every reason to." The evening breeze lifted softly through the terrace. Inside the house, somewhere far behind them, Odessa deliberately closed a cabinet louder than necessary. Listening, obviously, Warren continued. "I also know that every ordinary day beside you has become the part of my life I protect most carefully. No grand flourish. No kneeling immediately. Just truth laid down first. Then he reached into his coat pocket. The ring was simple, elegant, old-cut diamond, modest by billionaire standards, chosen like a man who understood she would distrust anything louder. "I am too old to confuse spectacle with sincerity," he said. That nearly undid her. "So I'll ask plainly." He held her gaze fully now. "Would you let the rest of my life become something we build carefully together?" For a second she did not answer. Not because doubt returned. Because certain moments deserved silence before language. Inside, a floorboard creaked. Then another. Zion. Definitely listening. She laughed softly through sudden tears. "You knew they were all inside that window, didn't you?" "I assumed Odessa had already informed half the city. She informed Aunt Celeste yesterday. Then we are late." That laugh became the thing that saved her from crying outright. She looked at the ring, then at him, then said the only honest thing possible. "Yes, but only if Odessa agrees not to plan everything." From inside the terrace doors came Odessa's voice immediately. "Too late." Warren closed his eyes briefly, smiling now for real. When he slid the ring onto her hand, it felt strangely calm. No thunder, no cinematic swelling, just certainty finally arriving without fear beside it. The wedding happened 6 weeks later. Small, exactly as she wanted. A garden ceremony at dusk behind the church where Miss Lorraine insisted the acoustics honored vows properly. White folding chairs, soft flowers, no press, no spectacle, no business associates who confused attendance with relevance. Only people who had earned proximity. Odessa supervised flowers like military strategy. Eleanor controlled timing with legal precision. Mrs. Talbot argued with the florist and somehow improved everything. Aunt Celeste wore lavender and announced twice that men should always look nervous before vows. Warren did. Not visibly to most people. But Imani saw the small signs, the stillness in his shoulders, the extra breath before each sentence. That moved her more than confidence would have. Because this mattered enough to humble him. Zion stood beside Warren before the ceremony began, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. "You staying for real now?" he asked quietly, not looking up. Warren answered with the seriousness the question deserved. "Only if your mother keeps choosing me." Zion nodded once. Then after a beat, "She will." When music began, it was not grand. Just piano. Soft. Measured. Imani walked slowly down the aisle with Aunt Celeste on one side and her own quiet steadiness on the other. She did not feel like a woman being rescued. She felt like a woman arriving fully awake inside a choice she had earned. Warren watched her with that same expression he wore the first night in the car when recognition collided with relief, except now relief no longer looked fragile. It looked rooted. The vows were brief because neither of them believed length improved truth. Warren's voice remained low, steady. "I promise not to love you loudly when careful is what you need." Several women in the front row immediately reached for tissues. Imani answered after one breath. "I promise not to mistake peace for something temporary, just because life taught me to expect interruption." Even Odessa wiped one eye and pretended she had not. When they kissed, it was warm and gentle, and entirely theirs. No applause at first. Just silence. Then Aunt Celeste clapping once and declaring, "Good. Now somebody feed people before emotion turns into low blood sugar." The reception happened under string lights. Simple food. Good music. Laughter stronger than formality. Miss Lorraine danced first. Mrs. Talbot shocked everyone by knowing every lyric to an old Motown song. Eleanor, against all known probability, smiled twice in public. And Zion spent half the evening explaining to anyone who would listen that Warren still cut carrots badly and should not be trusted unsupervised near kitchen knives. Late in the evening, after the guests thinned and warm lights softened around the garden, Imani stood slightly apart near the edge of the lawn. Warren found her there, married now. The words still sounded unfamiliar inside her own thoughts. "You disappeared," he said softly. "I stepped away for 1 minute. That counts." She looked toward the tables. The women laughing. Odessa correcting somebody's dessert portions. Zion holding court near the telescope Warren had arranged at the far end of the lawn for evening stargazing. Then she looked back at him. Do you know what surprises me most? What? That happiness is quieter than people promise. He understood immediately. Yes, he said. That is why most people miss it when it finally arrives. She leaned into him lightly. No fear, no bracing, just warmth. And standing there under summer dark Atlanta sky, with laughter behind her and stars beginning overhead, she understood something she wished she had known years earlier. Some women do not wait for love. They survive long enough to recognize it when it arrives without asking them to become less than everything life already taught them to be. And maybe that was why this ending felt true. Not because the billionaire married her, but because the woman who once entered a stranger's car in fear had lived long enough to step toward peace with open eyes and choose it for herself.